Welcome to Mama Needs a Moment, and welcome to our incredible HER Plus expert providers for another roundtable conversation. This month, we're diving into a topic that so many moms are navigating. It comes up all the time: parenting tweens and teens. New challenges, new strategies, because they are needed at this stage. As our children grow, so does the complexity of parenting. The tween and teen years bring emotional, physical, social, and developmental changes that can leave even the most confident parents wondering if they're doing enough or if they're doing it right. Today, we're going to explore how moms can stay connected while encouraging healthy independence, which is always the goal. We'll talk about communication, puberty, emotional health, executive functioning, boundaries, and the everyday struggles that help families navigate this season with more confidence and less conflict. Before we jump in, we're going to have each of our experts briefly introduce themselves and share the unique perspective that they're bringing to today's conversation. And if you enjoy today's discussion, remember that every roundtable episode is also available in video format on our YouTube channel. Let's go ahead and kick it off with Gigi.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Gigi Miller. I'm a certified neurodiversity coach, and I help teens and adults mainly with executive functioning. A lot of my clients also have ADHD, depression and anxiety. And I love this topic because executive functioning skills are still developing way into their 20s of kids. So parents sort of see different changes and they're wondering what's going on. And so I think it'll be interesting perspective from that point of view. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Winslow. I am a pediatric occupational therapist by training, and I'm the CEO and owner of Emerge Pediatric Therapy here in the Triangle. I personally spend a lot of my time these days from the perspective of helping families, kids, whole family systems understand sensory processing, executive function, co-regulation, which I think is going to be a big topic today. There's a lot of co-regulation that we still have to do with our tweens and teens. And I think what probably makes me even more excited about this conversation is I am the mom of 3 girls, and 2 of them are in the tween teen stage right now. So a lot of my work over the last 6 months or so has also been focused on understanding how that shows up in girls with ADHD and how puberty impacts that as well, because there's just not enough research on it. So I'm excited about this conversation today, and from here hearing about everyone else's perspectives as well.
I'm Jill Triana. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor with nearly 25 years of experience, which seems so odd to say. I'm also the founder of Centerline Counseling, where I specialize in working with high-achieving, resourceful, high-capacity women who are anxious and stressed, overwhelmed, burned out. I'm so excited to be here today because I've spent my entire career working almost exclusively with tweens, teen girls, college and young adult women and their families, namely their moms. So this is right up my alley. I also work with women who are managing multiple roles, going through a variety of life transitions, and just struggling to balance it all. I work with a lot of moms, though, as they navigate overwhelm and anxiety that goes along with parenting through the teen years. And one thing that I've learned is that parents don't lose influence during the teen years, but they often do lose confidence. And so my work surrounds helping moms understand what's happening developmentally, neurobiologically, so that they can stop second guessing themselves and strengthen their relationship with their child and parent from a place of confidence instead of worry and fear. So I'm excited to have this conversation today.
I'm Cassandra Pickett. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and mental health coach for women, working on boundaries and overfunctioning so women feel like they're living in alignment with their core value system. And I think the perspective I'm excited to get to chat with all of you experts on today is I've been a marriage and family therapist for 16, 17 years, but my oldest son is 12. So I have a 12-year-old boy and a 10-year-old boy. So I get to kind of live the textbook life and work with clients, and then I get to walk the plank and be like, oh, okay, I see. That's really hard. Or this didn't work the way we thought it did. And I just have really enjoyed and not enjoyed being in that space in my personal life. So I'm excited to learn and chat, and I think it'll be fun.
Parents often see attitude, procrastination, emotional outbursts, or withdrawal and immediately wonder how to fix the behavior. But behavior is communication, not only when they're older, but also we've heard this a lot when they're younger, that behavior is communication. When we become curious instead of reactive, we often uncover something much deeper, whether it's anxiety or hormones, executive functioning, nutrition, social pressures, or even emotional overwhelm. There's often much more going on than meets the eye. When tweens and teens are struggling, what are some of the hidden factors that parents should consider before reacting to the behavior that they're seeing? I notice this a lot in my youngest. So help me understand what we should be doing in this situation.
You hit on it right there, and you kind of described the quintessential iceberg effect, right? Like the behavior's the part sticking out of the surface of the water that you can see, and then there's this mass below the water that you can't see, but you know that there's more behind it. You know there's something there that's behind the behavior. And sometimes as parents, we may not exactly be able to pinpoint that, right? And so there's one thing that I think about a lot with this, and it's that if we just correct the behavior, then we miss the reason it exists. So it is important, especially in these teen and tween years, to, sometimes the behavior does need to be addressed straightforward. They're doing something that's inappropriate or not okay, and that needs to be addressed. But it's also important to look deeper at what's going on. And I think often emotions can be very confusing to interpret in teens. They can be misunderstood. Like anxiety doesn't always show up like classic worry and fear. It often shows up as irritability and anger. So if the door slams, then you might want to think about that. Like, okay, what's driving this, right? And you may not always know the answer. Or what I see a lot is, perfectionism coming up for a lot of teens. And that's not just about high achievement. It's about worry and fear too often. So what we see above the water isn't always exactly what meets the eye.
I would definitely agree with what Jill said. And then for people who might find this helpful, I think sometimes people want to flip the iceberg upside down, and they want to see what's underneath so deeply, especially with depression and anxiety and the rates of that increasing with teens and tweens. And I always want to start at the root of sleep is the hill to die on. Protein, sun, walks, family dinner, reduce screen time, reduce social media, and then let's see what's left over under the iceberg, because a lot of times that's truly what's going on. People are like, no, but we have depression, we have anxiety. And then when they dig into it, they're like, my kid's staying up on their phone till 2 a.m. They're really tired and they're overexposed to peer. They have a high peer orientation. That is creating depressive symptoms, not the child doesn't have true clinical depression. So if you ignore life skills and functioning and jump right into, intensive mental health treatment, you oftentimes are creating problems that aren't there. So I really, even as a mental health therapist, I'm like, try all that at home. And if you still need me, I'll always be here. But I really think it's important to empower parents to understand that for the most part, they have the tools their child needs, and they don't need to be afraid or feel that there's not something they can do to make a positive impact at home. So like I said, the sleep, the water, the protein, the movement, the screens, the family dinner. If you're doing all of that consistently and your child's still having extreme behavioral issues or anxiety or depression, that's clinically significant and you want to look at it. But just because you have a grumpy teen or they're behaving poorly and they don't want to go to school or they're describing anxiety to depression does not mean that they have that clinical diagnosis. And there's a lot of people jumping to that really quickly, especially from what they see on our own feed as parents. of all these clinical things your child can have. So I think everybody just taking a deep breath and being like, what's the list of non-negotiables? And let's see if we're okay before we decide we're not okay.
I completely agree. I actually, for my clients, created a little workbook that I call the 4 Pillars Workbook that goes through, diet or what you consume. So that would include, of course, hydration and, meals, but also anything else you consume, media, social media, screen time, all those things. Rest. So of course that's sleep, but it's also like downtime and relaxation time, movement, which speaks for itself, and then connection. So kind of the workbook's sort of designed to guide someone through that thought process so they can do it on their own without my support. And you're exactly right. Like just because you're noticing some troubling, concerning behavior, or you're worried about your teen's mental health, there could be underlying reasons for that. So trying to get to the bottom of that first before, taking another step is wise.
I want your workbook. I have a Teen 10 checklist and I give it to the parents. They call and they're like, oh no, we're having this behavior, we're not going to school. And I'm like, go through my checklist. And they're like, all right, we're not doing 5 of the things on the checklist. And then they call back in a month. They're like, we're okay. I'm like, it's okay. But I just think it's so important to empower parents to not feel like they have to drop kids off to a clinician for their kid to be okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mentioned kind of in the intro that I have been focusing a lot of my work, and probably, somewhat selfishly, given the stages that my daughters are in right now, but around how like hormones impact girls with ADHD particularly. And it's been also a learning process for myself, being a late diagnosed ADHD woman, was diagnosed in the last year. And so also understanding that when we're seeing like behaviors that kind of come out of left field, or we don't really understand, or why are we being so moody, or whatever those things are, like also knowing that particularly if something like ADHD is at play and we're dealing with, constantly looking for dopamine, when estrogen drops, dopamine also drops. And so when we start to better understand just kind of those other factors that are at play that our bodies are also wrestling with, I think it also helps us to know, not to excuse it, but to also give some more understanding for why sometimes they're easier than others. Because I think we can drive ourselves crazy a little bit, kind of taking data on like, you were just fine this time and now all of a sudden we're not. So looking at those parts of it. And I mean, I've noticed a lot of times there are, girls who are doing just fine, they hit 8 or so, and all of a sudden we're seeing a lot more come up. So whether that's more sensory sensitivities or the perfectionism or, whatever that might be, I think looking at how hormones might be impacting that, things can start to change, like as with sensory profiles and all of that when you introduce things like hormones. And as girls get older, like the hyperactivity kind of part does change, but that like inattention, like difficulty to sustain attention doesn't really, like that can also sometimes get worse. So it looks different. So I always come from the place of behaviors communication, understanding what that is. How can we support instead of put in consequences? I think a lot of times we just want to say like, you have like, what are you doing? You're having this giant like meltdown. I don't understand, like get it together. But then looking at, okay, how can I take a step back? How can I understand the factors are at play? What can I kind of take in from this experience? And then in going back to the curiosity piece, right? What can we kind of put together? But even for adults, we're always looking at like, how do you respond to sensory stimuli? And does that change with your stress or with different, hormonal changes? How are you able to co-regulate through that? How can you self-regulate? And then how does your executive function change? So really just knowing that the behavior, it's been said a couple of times already, but the behavior is not always just about the parent. There's a lot of things happening within their bodies that are influencing this and making it harder at certain times, and having some grace for that, and also giving them the understanding of that too, so they don't feel so hard on themselves, because no one likes having a big reaction to something they know is like not really a big deal. There's a lot of guilt and shame that happens with that too. One of my daughters who started ADHD meds thought it was going to like help overnight, and all of a sudden she wasn't going to have these big meltdowns and things that happened. And it's all a process, and having grace and understanding that we're always working through this together with them.
I want to jump in behind Brittany in agreement, and I'd be remiss to not say little boys cry so much, and people do not talk about it on social media. So almost every time a boy comes into therapy between the age of 8 and 14, when you're like, hey, how are you? They'll already have tears in their eyes. Like they're already ready to start crying, and they have no idea why, right? And their parents oftentimes are like, should I be concerned? And the kid is like, I'm the only kid that cries. Especially like boys 10 to 13, they're like, nobody cries but me. Baby, you're all crying. Everybody's crying. Everybody cries. They look at their dinner. They're like, I don't know why I'm crying. You ask them to shower. They're like, I don't know why I'm crying. It's really, 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 really normal. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we socialize little boys not to be emotional. And they get mistreated at school if they're crying. So they try so hard to hide it. And by the time they get to a safe grown up, they are just like literally holding back tears. So anytime you start talking about something or have a calm nervous system, they usually start just weeping. And it's really, really normal. Testosterone is going up and down. It's jumping around. It's affecting the amygdala, your emotion center, and it's just making things reactive, and it's normal. So if you have a little boy in your life, please, if you see him crying, let him know that all his peers cry too, and it's completely normal and healthy.
I'm glad that you just brought up the amygdala because, I do think it's important to acknowledge that that emotional center of the brain matures sometimes years before that prefrontal cortex, which is where our emotion regulation skills come from. So they're having these big emotions, but they don't have the skills to manage it very well. And so then they lean into all of these other, not consciously, but they kind of just try to do what's expected of them, and either tamp it down or, I think more and more too, while girls are socialized to, that it's okay to have feelings, I see so often that they feel that they have to be okay. And so they often tamp it down, and they don't allow themselves to, they don't want to be seen as that crazy girl who cries all the time, or, or they're just expected to like have it all together. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. So it can really stem from some perfectionism and people pleasing. Like they don't want to make too many waves or cause an issue. But yeah, there's this disconnect because the brain is developing, and the amygdala and limbic system might be more developed than their ability to manage it. And so that's helpful to keep in mind too.
Well, and where little boys I tend to see more likely to cry is the flip side of that is little girls are mean.
Yeah.
They'll be mean, and they'll be like, I'm going to control what you play, what you wear, and recognizing that she's not a mean kid. That's her version of crying because she doesn't know what's on the dinner plate, right? So just looking at how we're socializing our kids and the labels we're giving them, and getting curious, like we talked about in the last episode, is so important.
One thing I tell parents is, going back to that word, curiosity opens conversations and judgment shuts them down. So again, everything you said about understanding where things are really come from, what is procrastination, maybe overwhelm, what's anger, maybe shame, withdrawal, that could be pure exhaustion. They're not sleeping. So, again, just kind of staying curious and having these open dialogues with your kids is really important.
This was such a good, powerful conversation. I took literally a page of notes because I want to tuck this away and remember it for later. I think one of the things that I'm really focused on remembering is the power of this idea of the home being a safe place. And myself as a parent being the safe person. And obviously that's the goal. That might not always be what transpires, but that's what, as a parent, we're aiming for. And in doing that, so much of what was discussed amongst our experts in this episode is this idea of understanding that what we're seeing come out in the moment, the actions, is not what's underneath. It's not all the behaviors underneath. And sometimes in the moment when there's a door slamming or screaming, it's really hard to remember that. I believe it was Jill who mentioned at some point that not having the prefrontal cortex at a certain age and not having the ability to regulate emotions. And I'm going to be completely vulnerable and honest and say, I don't always have the ability to manage my emotions as an adult. So that being said, you're trying to do that in front of your child because you want to teach that and you want to regulate your emotions so they can regulate theirs. And it's so powerful to remember in your brain as this is all happening that this is where your child is at developmentally and showing up in that space. And I just want to draw back to this idea that many adults also struggle with the things that Cassandra had mentioned initially, this idea of the basics, needing sleep and protein and water and monitoring screen time and social media usage, sunshine, movement, all of these things. And that's something a lot of adults struggle with. And I just had this beautiful image of it being a family time, of it being a family affair to get some sunshine and to go put our feet in the grass and, to get some movement in. And I know Jill had her 4 pillars too. So this is clearly something all of our therapists and providers are saying to us as parents, but I think we kind of miss it with a lot of the social media feed that is kind of pushed at us all the time. So this was a really powerful conversation. I took a lot of notes for when I'm parenting a tween or teen, and also for myself because it's self-applicable here.